What do we do to be prepared for full economic collapse? How can you start homesteading and growing your own when you live in the city? And when are we going to start Ask Homesteady up again? Right now. It's time for Ask Homesteady. We're doing it again. Let's dive into those questions and so many more in this week's episode of Ask Homesteady. This is Ask Homesteady. It's the weekly show we do where we answer your questions that you've left on our videos from this week. And we do that here in this video at the end of the week, every Friday. Well, most every Friday. I know the last couple Fridays I've missed Ask Homesteady, and then we did certain ones that were more themed. We're back at it, and there's going to be some changes to Ask Homesteady going forward. And the first one is obvious, the mustache. Yeah, I know, you're all wondering, what's with the mustache, Ost? Guys, save the jokes. I know, like, it's not me, but like, I think there's a time in every man's life where he just has to give the mustache a chance, right? Give mustache a chance. My kids wanted me to grow a mustache. Recently I had like a beard after vacation and I shaved everything but the mustache. And they were like, yay, mustache. And then the next day I shaved it off and they were like, what happened to your mustache? We liked it. So now they have this chant every morning, let it live, when I go in to like shave. And so I'm letting it live. We're giving the mustache a chance. I'm sure in the comments below you'll let me know what you think about my mustache. Because this is YouTube. What's the point of YouTube if not to vent your personal opinions out loud for the whole world to hear? Which is what the whole Ask Homesteady thing is all about. Venting my opinions on homesteading topics for the whole world to hear, and a lot of times continuing the conversation with you in previous videos, back and forth, comments below. We're going to make a couple changes to Ask Homesteady. Up until this point, I have been trying really hard to answer every question left on our channel each week. And obviously the last few weeks I skipped Ask Homesteady for the different reasons, and so there's just like 1,000 questions, and I could never get to all those questions. But it's getting to the point now where every week there are so many questions. Ask Homesteady is getting longer and longer, and I feel it would be a disservice to you to try to answer all the questions, because I'd start to get just short, snippety answers. And there's no real point to answering a question if you're just rattling off quick, like yes, no answers to your questions. I really want to get in depth, give you good, well thought out answers. So from now on, we're going to keep Ask Homesteady regulated to just this week, the 5 videos, well actually it's 4 videos that we put out in the week, just those videos, and I'm gonna pick like 2 of my favorite questions from each video on average. 8 questions, I'm sure you're gonna see more like 10 show up, but that's kind of the general guideline. If I don't get to your question, it's not because I don't like you, it's probably because it didn't meet the criteria for the week or the other questions did. So what is the criteria for answering a question on Ask Homesteady? Essentially, I ask myself a couple questions before I choose the questions that are gonna go up on Ask Homesteady. Here's the criteria. First, it has to answer a lot of people's question. So you can't ask, if you ask me like, hey Ost, what should I do on my 1-acre homestead? Although that just addresses your question, there's a lot of people who have a 1-acre homestead. So you'll be answering a lot of people's questions. Even if I just give you personally the answer, it'll help a lot of other people. So basically it has to help a lot of people answering that question, answer a lot of people's questions. It has to be something that generally is homestead focused. Once in a while we'll do like what we did a couple weeks ago. We did the one focused on marriage, which is okay to ask, personal questions, but most of the questions we try to answer on Ask Homesteady are really like homesteading focused, that will help a lot of people out on their homesteads. It has to be a question that I really feel capable of answering with some amount of authority behind my answer, something that I actually have some experience in. The point is, I don't want to answer questions that I don't feel authorized to answer, that I don't have enough knowledge behind. So if your question doesn't get answered this week, it probably didn't meet that criteria, that loose criteria, or we just had 10-ish questions that I felt were a better choice for the week. I'm sorry if I don't get to everyone's questions, but it's just getting impossible. Anyway, let's dive into questions. We have really good ones this week. Sabrina asks, when are you going to start to do Ask Homesteady again soon? Are you going to start to do Ask Homesteady again soon? Yes, she's been waiting for me to answer one of her questions. Sadly, I didn't choose her other, well, let me see, Sabrina, can I find your other question here? Sabrina had 2 questions I hadn't answered. First, she's a pioneer. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for being a Homesteady pioneer. They help support the show for $5 a month, and they get bonus content back from that. She asks, why am I not receiving your Farm Friday emails? Sabrina, I haven't sent a Farm Friday email out in like a month and a half. That's why you're not getting them. I have been so far behind this last month or 2 on all my work, which we'll talk about going into the new season, what we have planned for the show and production and emails and stuff like that, the website. We're going to be changing some stuff up. Farm Fridays are going to be one of those things. I just can't get a weekly email out. It's just not happening. And the other question Sabrina had that I'm not sure which one she was hoping to have answered was, how do we get freebies like we have in our hunting videos? We've got some free stuff for our hunting season. Do we barter for advertising time on the vlog? Do we send them a request? She's curious. Yeah, Sabrina, I usually reach out to the companies myself. I say, hey, we have this show. We have a big audience. I love your product and I'd like to share it with the audience. Can you give us what we're looking for? And in return, we will be sharing you with our audience because we like your product anyway. I get offered a lot of stuff that I don't like or I have never used, and I turn those people down because if I don't know that it's good and actually use it, I don't want to act in front of you like I do. So just the other day, somebody contacted me. They wanted me to share what did they want me to share? It was like a $30. Somebody had contacted me. They have an emergency radio. They were going to send it to us for free and say, if you could just do an honest review for our emergency radio, which I could do an honest review of it. They weren't asking me to, portray like I used it or anything, but I've just not used it. I have an emergency radio already. I don't need another one, and I have no reason to show you something that I can't stand behind and say, yes, this is great. So we share things on this channel that we use, that in the past we've usually paid for. Now we can get some stuff for free from these companies, which is a nice bonus to doing this channel. It helps us to do the channel and share the things that we do. And you from time to time get to learn about new products that you might find helpful, useful, and that I can stand behind and say, I would spend my own hard-earned money on this. I have in the past and I would again. So hope that answered your question, Sabrina. And now let's get to the next question from another person. This is a good question. Healing Earth Abundance Project. I was curious how prepared you are for the full economic government collapse. It is great that you hunt and raise chickens and milk your cow and save yourself and have yourself a little bunker even. But are you prepared for long-term problems? Or how about climate/environmental collapse, which will cause the other problems? So Healing Earth Abundance is kind of asking, how are we prepared for the huge kind of end of the world as we know it? Government collapses, there's anarchy in the streets, people are shooting at each other, and all your regular food, power, everything that you're used to having, all the modern conveniences is not there, or climate induced. So suddenly global warming kills all the crops, and then there's people out in the streets stealing MREs because there's no more food available, or there's a mini ice age and everything gets too cold. We could go on forever with the list of big scary scenarios. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of my homesteading life right now, a lot of what we do with homesteading and preparedness does stem a little bit from the concerns about bigger problems, but I am not what you would look at as like a end of the world prepper. So let me explain. Way back before we started homesteading, I read a book, 1 Second After, which is a book, it's a fictional book about an EMP. So an electromagnetic pulse that is like an explosion up in the atmosphere that is over the United States, and it shuts down the grid, and in the whole United States there's no power. And the book explores, I think it's about a year in the life of the people who have gone through this EMP. Power shuts down. What is day 1 like, where everybody's kind of like, well, this is weird. Day 2, where they're barbecuing up all the meat from their freezers. Month 4 where like there's fighting in the streets and shooting and people don't know what to do, and then at the end of the year where like people are almost all starving to death and 90% of the population has died. So I read that book and it got me thinking like, wow, that's so scary. What would we have done in this situation? But I didn't then like become a doomsday prepper. And I don't think that's what anybody should be when it comes to preparedness or homesteading, their approach to that. I think if you look into these different like EMPs, end of the world as we know it, climate, government collapse, if you look at that and maybe you read a fictional book, I like fictional books. I was just reading that book for entertainment and it got me like, oh boy, that would be crazy. What would happen? But if you start trying to prepare for the end of the world as you know it, you will become so overwhelmed because it's almost impossible to prepare for the end of the world as we know it because we don't know what that's like. It's the end of the world as we know it. And how do you prepare for something that you've never seen? How do you prepare for something no one you know has ever experienced? You'd have to guess a lot, and then you become so overwhelmed by like, oh man, we got to have all the food for 3 years and we got to be able to plant everything and regrow. And I think what happens to a lot of people who prep for that situation is they get excited, they go out and they buy a bunch of like MREs and maybe they buy a bunch of guns and ammo and they get a closet fully stocked, and then they look at their credit card bill and they're like, oh man, I just spent like $8,000 I got to pay off. And a year goes by and they're looking at this closet that cost them $8,000 and they've never once eaten an MRE, and you know, all the ammo's sitting there and they're not shooting it, and they're just kind of, oh man, that was a bit of a waste, and they get burned out and then they stop because it's not practical preparedness, and things that aren't practical usually get pushed to the back burner. And then the saddest part of all is that same person the following year gets cancer. This is a really sad like what if, but they get cancer and they are told they have 6 months to live, and they're $8,000 in debt for that, you know, closet full of bunker stuff, and they leave in their family with like debt, and oh man, they didn't get life insurance because they were too busy buying, you know, MREs, and like I hope the family likes eating MREs because now they're in debt and the primary breadwinner's dying and there's no life insurance. Wow, like super downer way to start this week's Q&A. So let's rewind. Same person reads a fictional book about the end of the world and they think, wow, that's crazy scary. But then they ask themselves, is that likely to happen to me? Well, probably not. So instead, I'd like to be more prepared, but maybe for things that will actually happen to me. What's a more practical way to go about this? I could buy a bunch of MREs, but I don't like eating MREs. In fact, I've never eaten one. Maybe I should buy one and see if I like it, but I'm going to just go off, you know, a guess here and say it's probably not as good as my wife's cooking. My wife's going to watch this video. I better say it's definitely not as good as my wife's cooking. What could I do instead? Well, what if I, just for practical preparedness, start getting more of the things we actually use every week, groceries? What if I build myself a deep pantry? It would give me lots of food, just like a bunch of MREs, but it would be food that I actually like to eat. So to do that, I need to know what food we actually could store long term. I better put together a food journal. So this person gets himself a food journal and each week writes down everything they use in the kitchen, all the snacks their kids eat, cereal, everything. And then they look at the end of the week and they say, okay, wow, we went through 5 boxes of cereal. We went through 2 bunches of bananas, part of a well-balanced breakfast. We went through 3 boxes of gummy bears. Whatever it is, there it is on the paper. We went through 2 chicken fillets, 3 cow steaks. Okay, so some of these things perish, right? Bananas go bad. I can't do a deep pantry full of bananas. But I could buy, wow, they went through 5 boxes of cereal. That's a lot of cereal. I could buy more cereal. So next time I go to the supermarket, if I normally buy 1 box of cereal, well, now I'll buy 2. And I'll do that every month for the next 6 months, because cereal doesn't go bad in 6 months. And then what I'll do is I'll bring it home and I'll put it in my pantry, and I'll put the freshest box to the back, and I'll keep bumping them forward. Choot, 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 choot. And after 6 months, if they've done that with all their non-perishable goods, that same closet is full of food as it was with MREs. Maybe they spent a similar amount of money on that, but when that same person sadly gets told you have this disease and for the next 6 months you're not going to be able to work, they say, well, you know what? We have 6 months worth of food. That's one less expense that we have to worry about. Let's live off of the food that we've purchased and focus on my treatment and seeing if I can fight this disease and get better. I know the doctor said it doesn't look good, but I'm going to focus all my energy on that because I don't have to worry about food for my family. We're prepared there. We put a little bit of extra money aside. They prepared practically for what was most likely going to happen, not for the end of the world. And if the end of the world as they know it did happen, well, the closet full of food they like to eat is not going to hurt. Prepping for the end of the world would take lots of time, lots of money, and if you instead keep focusing on preparing for the thing that's most likely to happen and build from there, well, in 10 years' time, you will be very prepared for very big disasters. And if something really huge does happen, you'll be much better off than the person who bought a bunch of MREs and guns and then burned out. So that's the approach we try to take with preparedness and homesteading. We don't prep or homestead for the end of the world. We don't prepare for government collapse or economic collapse. That's not why we do this. We do try to build a lot more redundancy, a lot more self-reliance and self-sufficiency into our lifestyle. So if something did happen, we would be okay. And a perfect example of this is not too long ago, back at our old homestead, we lost power for a whole week. And that year, we were totally unprepared. We were brand new on the homestead. We lost power for a week. Fortunately, at the time, we hadn't been doing a bunch of meat stuff, so we didn't have a bunch of freezers full of meat. We were kind of brand new homesteaders, so it wasn't as big a deal with the water for the animals and that sort of thing. We just had some chickens at the time. But that 1 week of no power, hauling buckets in to use the bathroom, and I mean, it was not fun. My son was about 1 year old at the time. That showed me like, oh man, we're not prepared for 1 week without power. What would it be like if there was a really bad storm and we had to wait a month? We would be really in bad shape. And having the animals on the homestead, you can't leave. You got to stay there and care for your animals. I realized then I needed to change. So the next time that happened, we had already built in more redundancy. We got a generator. It happened again the following year. We lost power for a week. This time we got a generator. We could run the house on the generator, but with the generator, we just ran power cords through the house, which meant like you plugged in a freezer, you plugged in a lamp, you still didn't have hot water. Well, that taught us, okay, we need to have a better situation than that because that's still not great. So then we put a backfeed plug into the house, properly installed by an electrician with the safety shutoff so you can't hurt anybody who's working on the power grid down the line from you. And then the next time we lost power, we just plugged our generator into that backfeed plug, shut the main breaker off, turned the generator breaker on, and boom, our whole house lit up, hot water, freezers running. But now, how long can you run a generator with gas? Well, that's where we left off. That's about as prepared as we were for that experience. And we keep building on that. So we keep preparing for the things that are most likely to happen. So then how do you identify what disasters to prepare for? What is most likely going to happen to you? You're going to lose a job, or your mate's going to lose a job. That happens to probably out of everybody you meet, half or a third of them have lost a job. That's just going to happen. When you lose your job, you lose your income. So what can you do to prepare for that? A deep pantry is going to help. Putting money in a savings account, having an emergency fund of at least $1,000 that you can tap into liquid, and then grow that emergency fund from $1,000 to 6 months worth of expenses. Loss of a job, that's one of them. Sickness. Maybe not sickness resulting in death, not a terminal sickness, but some serious sickness that kind of wipes you out for a while. Maybe it makes you take more time off from work where you don't get paid. An injury, a work-related injury, and they say no to workman's comp, and they fight you for it for years. I know people who got injured on the job, and they were told no by their company, and they had to fight it for years to get the workman's comp. I also know people who have abused workman's comp, so there's both sides of that spectrum. But the point is, an injury or a sickness is likely to happen to you. I had one year, I cut my leg wide open, and I had to be on crutches for a couple weeks. So that affected what we could do on the homestead. A hospitalization is likely to happen to you or a family member. Are you prepared just for the hospital visit? We've told this story before. My son, we had to rush to the emergency room one year, and it was right before a blizzard. And fortunately that year we put together go bags, individualized go bags for each family member. That's a great way to start preparedness. It's kind of a fun project. Everybody gets their own. When we went to the hospital, Kay and the baby were going to stay at the hospital. This blizzard was coming. I gave Kay her go bag and the baby's go bag. Good thing we did, because she wound up getting stuck in that. It was a children's hospital, which was about an hour away from where we lived. This blizzard came through. She had to leave the hospital because they were done with her, so she went to a Ronald McDonald house right down the street from her. She got soaking wet from the blizzard and cold, but she had clean clothes in her go bag. She had freeze-dried meals, which, even though she was at the Ronald McDonald house, they didn't have any protein, and she was breastfeeding a baby. That doesn't work, breastfeeding a baby without protein. So she took out one of her freeze-dried meals, boiled some water, she ate some Mountain House, she had fresh clean clothes for the baby, she had diapers for the baby, toothbrush, basic essentials. And that little bit of preparedness, that go bag and all the supplies probably cost about $200 altogether. It made life so much better for her during a hard time. She could focus on the bigger things like our son getting better, getting out of this blizzard and back with me again, and not worry about like being in wet, cold clothes and being hungry and worried about, feeding herself while she's feeding a baby. Practical preparedness. So build from the most likely thing that's going to happen, the most likely small disasters, and then grow outward. After you cover loss of a job, hospitalization, sickness, grow to natural disasters. Where do you live? Do you live near a volcano? Then prepare for that. If you don't, then don't worry, because if the massive Earth volcano happens, we're all toast, and you can't really prepare for that. Do you live in a place where you get hurricanes? Do you know where you're going to go if one comes and you have to evacuate? No? Well, you need to put those plans together. Grow outward like that. And then you'll find after years and years of doing that, if 10 years go by and the end of the world as you know it doesn't happen, that's okay, because you got money saved, you got a deep pantry full of food you like to eat. Every night you can lay your head on your pillow and feel like, you know what, no matter what happens, we're pretty darn prepared, and we're way better off than we were 10 years ago if something really big and really bad happens. And that kind of practical preparedness always feels good. You will use those preps. Trust me, you will use your go bag if you build a go bag for what you're likely to experience. If you build an apocalypse bag, you're probably not going to use it. Nobody has yet. But if you build a end of, your like going to the hospital go bag, well, you will definitely use that. And that practical preparedness will just keep giving benefits. This is why we're doing less questions on Ask Homesteady, because that question I answered and it took 15 minutes, but I really want to give these questions a good answer, and I feel like that's a pretty good answer as far as our approach to preparedness and how we approach kind of huge end of the world scenarios versus practical preparedness. And as you can see, a homestead, lots on the homestead is preparing you for long-term problems. So we have a self-sufficient chicken flock, which if we kept breeding chickens would never stop giving us chickens and eggs. We have cows. We don't have a bull, so we couldn't keep doing cows. But we have the chickens, we have plants, we have a lot of redundancy built in, and we could keep improving that, you know, as time goes forward. So hope that answers your question to our approach on preparedness. And let's get to another question. Poor Brian finally started asking Ask Homesteady questions, and we stopped doing it. I have like 3 weeks worth of Ask Homesteady questions from Brian, so I had to get a few in. First, he says, what about some hogs to butcher and a breeding sow? How about a real farmer pickup truck? And I think Brian has a few more questions. We'll see if they end up in today's show if we have time. But I thought I'd cover first the pigs one. Moving out of Connecticut, a lot of you who've watched our show for a long time know every year we would do pigs. Pigs are one of my favorite homestead endeavors. For me, if this homestead were Ost's homestead and like Kay wasn't involved and didn't want to do anything with the homestead and the kids weren't involved, all this homestead would be like meat, chickens, and pigs. My homesteading endeavors, the things I like myself, are the meat ventures. I love meat. I love the animals that give you the meat, and pigs are one of my favorite things to do every year. In just 4 or 5 months, you take this feeder pig to full size, delicious bacon producing, sausage, every bit of the pig's delicious. And then in 5 months you're done, hunting season arrives, and your work on the homestead's done for the year, and you can go out into the woods and hunt for the next 6 months. That's like my homestead. Now, I live in a family, we all work together, and so we do a lot of different things because that's what you do in a family. You do things other people like, even if it's not your thing. But pigs are definite. So Bri, can I call you Bri at this point in our relationship? The pigs are definitely on the list for next year. Moving, I had to find a new pig source, which I waited till we went to the fair in our county, and I asked, when I looked at all the pigs in the fair, I looked at what pigs looked the nicest, which pigs would I like to raise. You're looking for just a little combination of what the body looks like, what the attitude of the pig is like. Brian knows a lot about pig body conformation. I always use the wrong word for that. Anyway, what you're looking for in a pig. Also, I like to see a pig who's got a good demeanor to work with. I don't want some angry, wild, tusked thing running around my homestead where my kids are. I found one farm that the pigs looked great to me. They looked nice and calm. I walked over, I talked to the farmers a little bit, asked them how they do things. I got a phone number, so I may have my new pig source. I miss my one back in Connecticut. If you live in Connecticut or are close enough to go to Connecticut, Tom Dexter's the guy. And if you want to get a hold of him, just email me. I can send you his contact info. But so we'll see. I think if this guy works, then you'll see. Now, the second part of this question. So I love raising feeder pigs because, first off, it's a 5-month venture, and then you're done. I love homesteading in the spring and summer, fall. Well, I should say I love the more farming aspects of homesteading. I look at hunting as a very huge part of homesteading. If you look at the homesteaders from the 1800s going out west, read Little House on the Prairie, I think like the first chapter, Pa's coming back from a hunt. So hunting was a very big part of their lives, and I think it should still be a big part of homesteaders' lives today. So for me, I focus on farming stuff in the spring and summer when there's no hunting seasons. Then in the fall, I like to head out into the field and get more wild game into our freezers and foraging and that sort of thing, fishing. So for me, I like feeder pigs because you get them in the spring, they're done in the fall, they grow quickly, they produce an amazing product. They are heavy feeders. You have to be able to pay for their feed. You can't grow pigs on grass. I don't care what anybody says. You got to give them a good quality protein, good quality feed. If you're raising them on grass, you're supplementing their diet. They like grass, they'll munch on grass, they'll destroy your lawn, but you can't turn a feeder pig into a big fat freezer hog on just grass. You need to give them more, so just be ready to pay for that. What about a breeding sow, Brian wants to know. And this is where I say no. I will not be getting a breeding sow. I will not be breeding pigs. And basically it's an economic decision for me. So Brian has a lot of experience with livestock. A breeding sow is going to, depending on the breed of the pig, they can give anywhere from like 8 or 9 to as high as like 12, 13, 14 piglets in a year. They can do multiple litters, two, some, I know at least 2 in a year you can fit in. So you can, with a breeding sow, you can have a ton of piglets, which if you are a source for feeder pigs, people come to you, give you $100 per feeder pig, and you get, 30 feeder pigs out of your sow every year. You keep 2 for yourself. There's $2,800. Is my math right there? 100 times 28 would be 2,800. Okay, I think I always get a count the mic on for the math things. That could be nice, but you have to have the customers for that. And here I don't have contacts in the agricultural world. I couldn't move that many pigs. So now I have all these pigs that I have to feed. That's a ton. Feeding that many piglets is going to be a ton of feed. I don't mean a literal ton, much more than 1 ton. For that many pigs, you're going to go through so much feed. And the breeding sow herself is going to cost you 1 ton in feed every year, which back in Connecticut, I knew cost a ton of feed was around $600. I could probably get it cheaper here in Pennsylvania, but also everything is to scale. So if I sell feeder pigs in Connecticut, I could sell them for $100. Here in Pennsylvania, I'd get much less. So my point is, you have to have the business to support that sow. And here in PA, Bri, I don't have pork customers. I don't have feeder pig customers. Could I build that up over the next couple of years? Absolutely. But that's not where I want to head with my business right now. It's not where I want to invest my energy. I have seen what's involved with doing that sort of enterprise. Tom Dexter, the guy I got my pigs from, he was great at it. He had all the infrastructure necessary, everything. He was the guy for it. That's not me. I am not the guy doing the feeder pigs. I can accept that. I can acknowledge that. I used to wanted, back when I first started, I was thinking about doing it, but I've done it for enough years now. I've raised enough pigs to know. I like doing feeders. It's worth every penny to buy a feeder pig and let guys like Tom Dexter do all the breeding and have all that infrastructure and all that side of things. While in the fall, I get to go and sit in a tree stand and shoot deer and pheasants and all that stuff. So for me personally, I'll be sticking with feeders. And I think, honestly, for most homesteaders, feeder pigs are the right answer. I've seen lots of homesteaders who go the breeding sow route. Like a year in, they do feeders 1 year and they're like, that's it, next year we love this, we're going to breed a sow. And then it's a lot of work. As we know with the AI with Ladybug, that's very complicated. AIing a sow is no different. Sows are big animals. If you got experience handling sows and working with sows and boars, you know how dangerous they can be. I have no experience, like 10 minutes worth of experience around sows and boars. For me, the biggest pigs I ever work with are 300 pounds. A sow and a boar can be double or triple that. I've seen boars that are just giants. So for me, it's just not the path I want to go. Another reason, we don't want to have a giant sow. Sows can become very protective of when they have their young. And I don't like the idea of having a giant, very protective sow with my kids here on the homestead. One of the things we often make decisions about is the safety of our children on this homestead. So do I want to, one of my younger kids to like climb up to look and then fall into the pen and there's this 600-pound angry sow who's all raging on pregnancy hormones, wants to come over and just bust my kid? I don't want that. So for us, we're not going to go the sow breeding route. We're going to stick with just the feeders. How about a real farmer pickup truck? More on that later, Bri. It's getting to be a necessity, the pickup truck, for a few different reasons. You saw this week we talked about how we're getting more involved, me and Bones, in bird hunting and guiding work there. And there's some opportunities that could be on the horizon for me as far as that work goes. But I would need to I need a truck to be able to do that kind of work. We have a lot of maintenance here on this property that a truck would be really helpful for. It's just becoming one of those things. Brian knows if you're going to be a real farmer, you need a pickup, right? You can't drive around in a creeper van your whole farm career. So more on that to come later. I don't have a date for you yet, but we'll talk more trucks in the next year. And Brian says, I bet the marketing genius in you could find a dealership to trade advertising on the channel. Boy, it's a good idea, Brian. Let's see what we can come up with. We actually got 2 really good questions this week about venison and the organic nature of it, and also just kind of organic eating in general. So I'm going to combine these 2. So actually I'm going to read the other one first. Lynn says, wow, that was a nice buck. Thanks, Lynn. I have a stupid question and I'm not being a smart butt. It's okay to be a smart butt. I don't want to have a dumb butt. How is that meat considered organic when he wanders around and possibly eats sprayed grass on fence lines or weeds in the fields? I mean, it probably is, but they eat in a large area, so you don't really know what they are eating. So good question from Lynn, and thanks to superfan T-Roo for adding the Ask Homesteady hashtag. Then Shay adds to this question. In part of this video, you called the venison organic, a tough claim to make with wild game. Reminded me of a question I've been meaning to ask. On the one hand, y'all seem to be very on board with the idea that food should be organic, and by extension, non-GMO. On the other hand, you use wormers, which make your milk not technically organic, and advocate relying on scientific study, which has consistently found GMO crops to be non-harmful and equally nutritious. I'm not judging any of that, and in fact take a similar approach. My chickens eat conventional feed, but when I have to buy eggs, I buy free-range organic because they are what tastes closest to ours, but it does have me wondering, what are your reasons for preferring non-GMO and/or organic food? So we're going to combine these 2 questions. First, are deer actually organic meat? Can we make that claim? And then second, do we care? What is our feelings about eating organic and non-GMO? So first, let's talk about the deer question. Are deer considered organic? When we talk about organic, what do we mean? Well, there's certified organic, which every state has their own board, which can approve according to the standards that the state has put up. I've probably made it clear in the past that I don't have a whole lot of confidence in government oversight when it comes to things like my food. So I'm not really interested in what the government calls organic. That certified organic stamp doesn't mean a whole lot to me. But I do use the word organic when I'm throwing it around just kind of nonchalantly to describe more naturally produced food. So I know that's my own fault for just throwing that word out there. I should use a different word than organic. It's just a word people understand the connotation. If you say something's organic, people think, oh, it's more naturally produced. That might not be what it actually is. There's a lot of organic production methods that are far from natural, but are allowed according to the organic standard. What I should say is deer meat is a great natural meat. The problem is the word natural has been so tainted by every label in the supermarket. You see natural slapped on gummy bears. Natural gummy bears. That's not natural, it's a gummy bear. Every bear I've ever seen in the wild has fur on it. I've never seen a gummy bear in the wild, so not very natural. But anyway, the point is, venison, in my opinion, is one of the better quality meats you can feed your family. If your goal is to eat organic, for the most part, depending on where you're hunting, venison would meet that standard. Why can I say that with confidence? Why can I say my deer could be officially stamped organic? Because a deer sets up its home range 1 mile, 1 square mile. Now, if you've ever watched the way deer work, they don't walk to the border of that 1 mile and then go to the border of this and, oh, that's my 1 square mile. 1 square mile I live in. But on average, their life takes up about the area of an acre. Does can be more homebodies. Bucks, especially during the breeding season, the rut will cruise a lot more. But for the most part, if you are hunting a group of deer on your own property, you can draw a 1 mile radius around you and then shift it as if you were the border this way and shift it as if you were the border that way and up and down, kind of creating much larger than just 1 mile. Maybe it would wind up being, Venn diagram style. It would wind up being like 2 or 3 mile circle around, because you don't know if you're the center of their 1 mile or if you're like the far border. But the point is, if you know within about 5 miles that there are no big farms with sprayed crops, golf courses, suburbs where people are treating their lawns, then your deer are not eating any chemically sprayed grass or trees or anything. And I know where we live, in about a 5-mile radius, there's none of that. There's no suburbs. Most of it is just mountains and wilderness. Most of the property closest to us is all owned by family, who none of the family here sprays anything. We're all very against using chemicals on our properties. Let's not get into that. But anyway, we try to keep things chemical free and just let the grass grow the way it grows. So the deer that I hunt here in our area, I can 100% say are as good or actually better than what you would buy from the store with that organic stamp on it. I also know, I have heard this now, I can't produce a scientific research to prove this. Maybe there's studies out there, but I have heard people, in talking about GMOs, mention that wildlife will often avoid crops that are GMO and have been sprayed. Now, I didn't do the research to back that up. Is that true or not? Has there been studies done on that? If you find one, comment below. I'm not saying that's true or not. It's just another little tidbit I heard one time from a biologist talking about how, the deer avoid the GMO crops. That said, there are plenty, that was if they had the option. There are deer in the Midwest who are surrounded by GMO soy, GMO corn. They love it. They get huge on it. They chow down. They become these giant bucks. If you're hunting those deer, yeah, they're eating GMO crops that have been sprayed with chemicals. And could those deer, their meat be considered organic? No, it wouldn't pass the organic standards. And you wouldn't be, if you're looking for an organic quality product, and you live near a golf course or near a farm who sprays that sort of thing, then you're probably not going to have that in your meat. Now, deer also, depending on the time of year, will prefer, for example, acorns. White acorns are one of their favorite meals. So when the white acorns are falling, they won't be in the crop fields because they love the white acorns. So depending on the time of year, you know what deer are eating, you know where they're at and where they're not. But again, for those of you who live in farm country, if you're hunting in farm country and the deer are out there eating, sprayed corn, sprayed soybeans and that sort of thing. There's a lot of guys who do food plots who do spray their food plots and spray their corn. Then that is part of what the deer are eating. And if you're looking for an organic quality product, it probably would not meet the standards of an organic quality product based off your state's judgment of what meets that standard. Would I worry about a deer that's a farm muncher? Personally, I would not. If I knew a farmer who raised GMOs, soy, and his deer, and there were deer in that field coming out to eat the GMO crops, munching on the GMO crops, I probably would not be overly concerned about eating that venison. Because when it comes to, and now we're getting into the second part of this question, how do we view eating GMOs and eating non-organic versus organic? When it comes to our dietary restriction or lack thereof, Kay and I often will follow the 80-20 principle for almost all dietary restrictions. We personally believe when it comes to diet, moderation is key in all things. If you can be moderate in how much dessert you eat, if you can be moderate in how much meat you eat, moderate in what you put in your body is built to handle a lot of stuff. We have organs that take toxins out of food. We have organs you can drink alcohol because your liver's going to remove some stuff from it. Our bodies are made to handle the 80-20. Now, if all you eat is Twinkies all day, your body's not going to work very well. You're going to get diabetes. That's on you for eating Twinkies every day. Trust me, I would like to eat Twinkies every day, but, diabetes. I'm not making a joke about diabetes. The way I'm making a joke about the way that guy says diabetes, which everybody makes that joke, so lame Ost. You just made a joke everybody makes. Anyway, the point is 80-20 principle in all things, including GMOs. Why? I was a child who was born in the 80s, raised through the 90s. GMOs quietly came into the world scene back in the early 90s. My parents loved me very much, fed me as best as they thought they could, were chock-a me full of GMOs. By the time I knew what a GMO was, I had been eating them for a solid decade, maybe almost 2, packing them to, eating all kinds of GMO stuff. And for the most part, I'm all right. Like, I'm okay. I usually feel good in the morning, I feel sore and stiff once in a while. I get sick from time to time, but for the most part, I'm okay. My diet wasn't fully stocked GMOs. I wasn't eating Twinkies all day long, but I was getting GMOs all the time in the cereal and in the bread and just, the everyday, fast food, the stuff that we ate. It wasn't until Kay and I started producing most of our food and then buying from local farms that we kind of got away from that GMOs in our body. So when we choose what we're going to eat, we stick to that 80-20. We produce all the meat my family eats, either gets raised on this farm, shot off this farm, or when it comes to beef, once in a while there's a local farm that my in-laws will trade for a beef and we get to get some of that beef. We trade meat and stuff. So we get locally produced beef. But as you know, it won't be too long. We might have some locally produced beef of our own and then we'll be back to just all our own meat. That is all produced off of, I shouldn't say all produced. From time to time, if we can't find a good locally produced GMO-free feed, sometimes our animals will get a feed with GMOs in it. But to the best of our ability, if we can find feed that's GMO-free, if we can find a good quality, organically raised, GMO-free feed, we will choose that. Our animals are out on grass in the backyard here. Our grass isn't sprayed, so there's no issue there. They're getting hay. The hay that we're using isn't sprayed, so that's good there. So for the most part, our meat is as far as we can tell, GMO-free, organically produced. Our crops we often buy from, like around here we do a lot of Mennonite farmers. We'll get crops in season at the farmer's market, we'll buy crops. But then, wintertime comes and like you buy your crops at the supermarket. Generally, Kay will look for organic. And again, it comes to that 80-20 principle because trust me, if you drive around where I live, someday one of you is going to get a picture. Oh man, there's Austin from Homesteady. He's at Chick-fil-A. He eats GMO raised chickens from factory farms. I love a Chick-fil-A sandwich. Guilty. And 80-20 principle, 20% of the time, actually way less than 20, but once in a while if I'm out driving around, I'm going to grab a fast food Chick-fil-A sandwich. And that's just the honest truth. I would be a liar if I told you like, oh, we don't eat fast food. No, once in a while you're out and about and you got to grab a bite to eat. You can go to a diner, you can go to McDonald's. The meat is the same at the diner or the McDonald's, unless the diner is like a pasture to plate thing. And if it is, it's going to charge you an arm and a leg for the same hot dog. But the point is, all that meat is coming from the same system. And that's where you're going to wind up, getting that 20% of stuff that you don't normally do. So again, I was raised on GMO food for a decade and change. I'm okay. So can my body handle it if once in a while I stop at Chick-fil-A for a sandwich? Yeah, it can. I'm not worried about eating a Chick-fil-A sandwich once in a while. But for the 80% of the time, we try to control our own food and we choose not to raise food on GMO feed if possible, or on non-organically produced food if possible. Now the final part of this question is why? Why do we choose to avoid that? It might seem hypocritical. You'll eat GMOs at Chick-fil-A, so why not do it with your own animals? Well, again, it's the 80-20 principle. So if 80% of the time we eat the best quality we can, and I believe when it comes to quality of like my feed, I don't know if there's anything about the GMO itself that's scary, and as Shay mentioned, scientific studies have found that they're equally nutritious or not harmful in any way. A plant that is GMO manipulated may or may not be dangerous. I'm not in a position to say. The scientists out there, scientists are arguing back and forth over that point. But what I personally don't like, and I've talked about this before on the channel, is if you produce a crop to be sprayed with an herbicide or a pesticide, then that crop can be sprayed in that herbicide and pesticide, and I don't want to ingest herbicide or pesticide, and I would prefer my animals not to if I can control that. And so if there's GMO soy or GMO corn that has been sprayed in an herbicide or pesticide and then ground up, will there be particles in there in the feed that wind up in my animals and eventually me? I don't know. Again, the science is out there. People are arguing back and forth. Link below if you have some good studies to prove one way or the other. Don't just argue, because this is bound to make people argue. But if you actually have like a scientific study to prove, link below. But again, a lot of times with stuff like that, you'll find stuff on both sides arguing, trying to support. I just think, well, if it kills a bug, if it's a pesticide and it kills a bug, or if it's an herbicide that kills a plant, common sense tells me I wouldn't take the bottle of that and give it a swig. So if I can avoid putting that in the bulk of my food, I'm probably going to be better off. Will I get some of it in my body? Yes. Will I drive down a road with the windows down, cruising to the tunes one day as a crop dusting plane flies by and not knowingly inhale some pesticides while I'm listening to my classic Pearl Jam playlist? Yeah, it's going to happen. You know? Even flow. 80-20, guys. We try to be balanced. We try to be reasonable. Some people will be angered by that, think it's hypocritical. I think it's hypocritical to be a perfectionist with food, because one day you're going to eat something that has a GMO in it. It's going to happen. And if you are like 100%, no, you can't eat GMOs, one day someone's going to come to your house and be like, hey, I baked cookies. And you're like, oh, these are great. Oh, God, I just ate a GMO. Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. It was just a chocolate chip. Next question. Destiny wants to know, how would I even start to try to put my own food on the table being in a city with a tiny backyard? Would love to know your advice. We get asked this once in a while. People ask this kind of question about, like, basically I live in a small area in the city. It's nice, you live in the city, but you actually have a tiny backyard. So that's, some people live in the city, they live on a balcony. So how would I even start to try to put my own food on the table? Great question, Destiny. Let's get into a couple strategies for people with very small, limited space to put their own food on the table. The first thing you can do is just look at your small space and just maximize production in small spaces. So you have a tiny backyard. Let's imagine you had a backyard that was the size of the table that I'm doing this on, right? This table is like, it's bigger than a 4x8 bed. It's longer, but it's narrower. So let's say it was like 4x8 raised bed. If the first year you wanted to garden, you did one 4x8 raised bed, and you used the square foot gardening method, where you take every square foot in your raised bed and you maximize production on that raised bed, not only linear in a 2D way, but even vertically. You know, you build lattice up the side so that your peas can grow really tall. You could get a ton of farm fresh production from one raised bed. You would learn so much about plants and vegetables and gardening. You would enjoy every minute of it, because one raised bed is just an enjoyable thing. I don't even like gardening, but I enjoy sitting next to a raised bed after a long day of work with a beer in one hand, sitting there, because you're sitting, it's a raised bed, you're drinking your beer and you're just plucking a couple weeds. You don't have many weeds because you did a good mulch in your raised bed, which is one of the things you'll learn from, you know, small scale, heavy production agriculture. But you know, you pick the one weed that's there, you pick it, you'll flick the one bug on the tomato plant. You don't need to use any chemicals, because you can flick that many bugs, and you take a sip of your beer, you'll relax, and every night at dinner you're gonna have something, because with the square foot gardening method, you learn how to harvest one thing that's a spring vegetable like lettuce, snip that lettuce, and now boom, in goes a fall crop. So you're constantly producing out of that small space. The biggest mistake new homesteaders make is thinking they need a ton of space, buying this huge farm, and then like doing what me and Kay did. Our first year of gardening, we set up like a half-acre garden. That was so stupid. We went through all this time and effort to prepare this huge space. We screened topsoil and brought it in with machines and built paths. And this huge space, it got so overwhelming. We wound up about halfway through the year giving up the battle with the weeds. They overgrew, and we got nothing out of a huge time and money investment. We got nothing. And that's how you burn out, by doing that. So you're actually fortunate to have just a tiny space to work with, because it will keep you from getting too crazy and burning out. So if you like the idea of a raised bed garden, if you like the idea of gardening, build yourself a raised bed garden. That's a great project for this upcoming winter. Get yourself some nice cedar if you don't want to use pressure treated stuff, or if you don't worry about the pressure treated stuff, get yourself some pressure treated lumber and build yourself a raised bed. Get some really good topsoil in that raised bed. Learn about what makes up good soil. The building of the raised bed and the learning about that soil will take all winter into the early spring. And then if you build yourself a cover for that raised bed, you can start planting early in the spring. I don't know where you live, but you could get right into it. You'll do really well with that. You'll learn a ton, you'll love it. And if you want to grow later from that, you'll grow with knowledge and confidence, as opposed to being overwhelmed and giving up and frustrated. So it's always better to start small and build from small, humble beginnings. If you don't like the idea of gardening and you still have this tiny backyard, there are other things you can do in tiny spaces. I don't know how small your backyard is. I don't know what's legal in your city, so you'll have to look into that before you go down the livestock track. Generally, there's laws keeping chickens out of a city, but do they keep bunnies out of the city? Are you okay raising meat rabbits? People around you, neighbors, won't have any idea they're meat rabbits. Don't harvest them on the front porch. Hey everybody, how's your morning going? Ours is going great, killing bunnies. You know, be smart about how you do things. Have your rabbit hutch in the back and it's just your pet bunnies, and then go into your garage, or, well, you're in the city. It sounds like you're in like a small suburb home or something. But anyway, you know, butcher it incognito, and you just have pet rabbits or ducks. I have been to cities that didn't allow chickens, where ducks were considered a pet. And you can do real well with a couple ducks. Put a little water feature in your backyard, the sound of running water, a couple ducks splashing. Awesome for duck eggs if you can eat duck eggs, unlike me. So there's another good small space. Now, ducks, rabbits, a couple chickens, bees, a little garden. These are all things you can do in a very small space. Start producing your own food. Feel more homesteady, happy. In addition to that production, and that'll keep you very busy. I mean, one raised bed with the square foot gardening method could be enough for someone with a full-time job. You love life, you'll enjoy every minute of it, you'll eat good food. Add to that a little duck pond and you're like producing. The duck manure goes back into the raised bed. You got this really sweet cycle. Cuttings come out of the garden and feed the ducks. I mean, that's great. And then in the duck pond you throw a couple fish. Now you're really talking about like symbiosis. Start to leave your little mini farm there and get more homesteady with the help of your community. We talk about this a lot here at Homesteady. People forget homesteaders from the 1800s relied so much on community. One of the things you learn when you live around, we live around lots of Mennonites. Mennonites, for those of you who don't know, similar to Amish in some ways, in that they're off-grid with energy and power. All their farming work is done out in the fields. Most of it is done with livestock. From time to time, you'll see some sort of farm contraption out there. I'm not telling you, like, this isn't a lesson in Mennonites. It's just to tell you I see a lot of people who are back to the land, homegrown, off-grid people. And you know what I've learned from living around Mennonites for the last 6 months? They are a huge community that all work together. It is really hard to homestead as an island and produce everything. So start to take advantage of community, just like those Mennonites, like the homesteaders from the 1800s. You can't do it alone. Nobody can raise all their own food. Nobody can do it. It's impossible. So rely on that community. Are there farms within an hour drive from you who you could go and work 1 day a week in return for some of their produce or some of their meat, or just work for free to learn some skills that you can then later take somewhere else. Awesome. Are there farms that sell at farmers markets that you could go up to and say, hey, I want all your I want your bulk stuff that you don't sell here at the market. At the end of the day, I'll come by, I'll take it all at a reduced price. Then you go home to your little apartment and you do some canning and put up a ton of stuff. You didn't grow it, so what? You're supporting a local farmer in your local community. That's great. And at a reduced price than what you would have paid at the supermarket, you're getting a better product. Something that was picked at its perfect moment. The stuff in the supermarket generally is not picked at the perfect moment. It has to get from California, where it was grown, to Wisconsin, where you're shopping, in the back of a truck. So they pick it early, and you don't get prime perfect food that way. You go to your farmer's market, that stuff was picked for peak flavor and lifespan. And there it is sitting right there. You can get it at a reduced price if you buy in bulk, can it, and now all winter long you're enjoying what you put up with your own skills of canning, being a homesteady person, the most delicious produce you can eat all winter long. And you're still eating locally, and you're supporting your local farmer community, which is great. Become a hunter. When I lived in a apartment space with a small backyard in the suburbs, and I realized, you know what, I want to feed my newborn son better food than what I can afford to buy. I said, well, what can we do? He started a little garden. At the time, I was not interested in gardening because I was an excavator who spent all day long digging ditches with a shovel. And I didn't want to come home after a long day of digging ditches and then dig more ditches. So I wasn't interested in gardening at the time. But I thought, you know what, I'll become a hunter. I wasn't a hunter, but I was a fisherman. I knew how good fresh fish could be on the table. I figured I'll learn to hunt. There is public land in every state that you can go to with some sort of gun, bow, crossbow, shotgun, rifle, slingshot, and bring wild game that belongs to everybody. The public lands belong to us all. Go there and harvest wild game. While you're out there, you can do a little foraging, learn to forage wild edibles, take advantage of the public lands. You can have such an awesome homesteady banquet all season long if you maximize production on your tiny little space and then take advantage of your local community and the beautiful wild yield that's all around you. Don't let lack of land stop you from living your homesteady dreams. Start in whatever way you can, and you'll continue to build skills. Start saving some money, and then in 10 years you will have so much knowledge, so many skills, and money saved. Then you go and buy a farm, and unlike me, who was like, sweet, I got a farm now, I'm gonna do a 1 acre garden, and then got totally overwhelmed, you're gonna show up and say, nice, I got a farm now, I'm gonna do a 1 acre garden because every year I did more and more and more, and you're gonna just slam dunk that 1 acre garden. Or more than likely, you're gonna realize after 10 years, 1 acre garden's a ton of work. You'd rather enjoy the relaxing side of homesteading and the benefits from now what you do, probably 4 or 5 raised beds, and just enjoy living on a nice farm with a couple raised beds, doing a little bit of hunting. Whichever way you go, that's up to you. And I hope this advice helps you get started Destiny in some small way. If you do, be sure to hashtag AskHomesteady in your comment. Put a link to an Instagram picture of your tiny space raised bed or whatever you do. We'd love to see your update, how you started from our advice here. This is one of those questions that I'm answering because I've seen a lot of people ask the question. So you remember at the beginning I talked about why I'm going to pick certain questions to share and Ask Homesteady. This is one a ton of people are asking. It's not very homesteady at all, but I want to answer it so people will know the answer to it, and then you can answer in the comments other people who ask it in the future, because people will ask the same question over and over. Karen L. asks a frequently asked question: what does that YouTube notice paper thing posted on the barn door say? Why is it there? Probably the 3rd time I've noticed it. Keep forgetting to ask. And I'm sorry, this has been asked a ton and I just haven't got around to answering it. No reason other than it just hadn't made the list previously. Basically, it is a sign that just says, notice before you enter this public space, we live stream from here, you will be on video, and you are releasing your image, your persona, to be used on any future videos that we produce without any money being paid to you or anything else. That is not the legal jargon, that's not the legal wording, but I put that up. It's something people put at like museums where they do live streaming, public places where there's filming going on. They put it up to tell people, hey, you don't have to walk into this space, but if you do, you are saying that you know you're on camera and that your image can be used in the future, and you can't come and sue me because I put you on YouTube. And it's a way, when I have people who do deliveries, people who come to do, you know, the AI on the cow or the hoof trimming or whatever it is, I want to show that on the channel, and I just want to let those people know, hey, you're going to be in the video. Now, I don't put up that flyer and then just ignore it and hope that they read it and be like, well, hey, I got you, there's the flyer, I got you. I use it as a way of bringing up the subject. When people arrive, we're chit-chatting, we're standing by, and then I can say, hey, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, we live stream video out of this barn, we film everything in the barn, I have barn cameras that are up. You're going to be on video, we have a YouTube channel. If you're okay with that, I'm going to include video from today, and then, you know, just so you know you're going to be in that video. And no one's ever said, because they're all people that are there selling me something, a service or a product, no one's ever said no. If someone said, no, I don't want to be on your video, I would either say, okay, thank you very much, we're going to go with someone else. Or if it's something that we just needed done, I would just say, okay, well, I won't use your footage. And I wouldn't, if someone doesn't want to be on our videos, I'm not going to force them to be on it. So depending on how rare and needed, if the vet showed up to fix one of my sick animals and said, nah, don't put me on YouTube, I'd say, okay, I'll shut off the cameras, and the vet would go on her way and continue to help my animals. If, you know, a guy who comes to do hoof trimming on our animals once every 6 months didn't like it, then I'd probably find a different guy who was comfortable with it and use him, because then I can show that on the channel. Last week we talked about butchering and we shared some supplies with butchering, and then this week we showed a lot of hunting, and I included this question from Isabel because I thought it was a really good one. Were you squeamish at all when you first started hunting? Do you leave the guts to be scavenged or take them with you? Congrats on the well-earned doe. And later this week we got the buck. So great question. I figured I'd talk about it not just with hunting, but just all kind of butchering included. I have been harvesting animals, wild game, processing, turning them into meat for a long time. The very first time I ever harvested an animal, it's kind of a fun history story here, history of Homesteady. I was probably 6 years old, and my uncle, his name is Uncle John. If you listen to our podcast, one of the very first episodes I told this story on the podcast. You should go check out, it's an episode about fishing, and I think it's episode number 2 of Homesteady podcast. My uncle was visiting, he's a really good fisherman, so I wanted to go fishing with him. There's this little spot that had a waterfall that was really good fishing. So I had him take me there. I'm about 6 years old. We get to the waterfall and it's all dried up. And I cried like a baby. I cried like a 6-year-old, maybe a 5-year-old. So then he took me to my grandparents' pond and set me up to catch sunnies, and we caught like 50 sunnies. Panfish, bluegill, that kind of thing. And I wanted to keep them and eat them. My parents would not have done this. They are not, you know, you saw in a video not too long ago their first hunting and then like butchering experience. That's the first time they've ever done that in their lives. They're not like harvest from the wild kind of people. I love my parents, they're great, but that's just not what they're about. But my Uncle John, he was kind of more of an outdoorsman. He liked fishing, and so I said, I want to keep these fish. So we brought like 50 panfish home, and like a good outdoorsy uncle, take note, all you outdoorsy uncles, he made me get involved. I couldn't catch 50 bluegills as a 6-year-old and then like go home and having cried and, you know, screamed at my uncle that there were no fish in the water, and then he took me to a new place. I didn't get to just, you know, throw the fit, catch the fish, and then go home and eat fried fish. He put me to work, and he put me to work scaling them. So here I am with 50 bluegills, a scaler, just Can I stop now, Uncle John? He was really tall. I had to like look straight up at him. I had to help scale all those fish. I had a huge pile of scales. They were in my clothes, on my clothes, just everywhere. But I actually really liked it. I got into it, and I think maybe that's where this all started. That one day he took all of them, he filleted them all, breaded them, made a bunch of little fish, chips. They were small fish, they were small fillets, but that's okay because it started. All this started right there. 6 years old, caught a bunch of fish, worked to clean them. I couldn't do a fillet knife at 6 years old, but I had to scale them. That was work, and then I got to enjoy eating that. And by the time I was a teenager, I was catching my own fish, killing it, cleaning it, feeding my family fresh caught fish. And that led to, as we already talked about in this episode, eventually when we were feeding our son, trying to feed him better quality meat, we decided to start hunting. So I wasn't really squeamish with that. And then when it comes to homesteading and butchering animals, by then I had field dressed a deer. So no, not very squeamish. Once you field dress a deer, to field dress a deer in the field, you open that deer right up and you have to reach all the way up in to cut everything and pull it out. And we're talking like shoulder deep, like this in a deer. So yeah, you get pretty comfortable with like guts and blood and that sort of thing. And it built over time. So if you're thinking about getting into hunting or homesteading or any sort of thing where you're going to be doing a lot of gutting and killing and that whole process, I would suggest start either with a fish or a chicken. Because of all the things, they're smaller, it's just a little bit easier to handle. When you pull the guts out of them, you will not identify with them. You pull a deer heart out and you feel like Ace Ventura. You're like, whoa, tum, 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 you pull fish guts out and you don't even recognize anything. You're just like, oh, all right, get rid of that. I don't know what that was. But it'll get you warmed up. So do a fish, do a chicken, maybe a turkey, and work your way up to the bigger animals. By the time you get there, you'll be used to the idea of opening something up with a knife, pulling some slimy guts out, and it'll get more and more like, okay, if you're really squeamish, you can wear rubber gloves. Nobody's gonna make fun of you because you want to wear gloves. It's all right. It's probably good practice anyway. And just build up to it. It's something I think everybody, honestly, if you eat meat, you should at least once kill, clean, prepare, cook. Start to finish, whole process. Now I say this, I don't like cooking, I don't enjoy it, I'm not good at it, but I've done this. I've cooked my venison, I've cooked my fish, I've cooked my pheasants. So even if you don't like the idea of some part of that, the killing or the clean, you should do it once, at least once, because then you got your merit badge that says, I know what's involved in killing an animal, I know what's involved in cleaning an animal, I know what's involved in preparing an animal. Next time I eat meat, I'll be grateful someone else did all the work for me, and I'll be sure to honor that meat by using as much as I can, taking full advantage of it. The rest of your life, you will handle meat in a more sacred level. Well, that Wayne, after you butcher your first chicken, the next time you eat chicken, you're like, oh, thank you for your sacrifice, chicken. We're gonna freeze dry you and we'll prepare you for stock. And over time then, maybe you just pick up a chicken sandwich and eat it. And it's not as big a deal, but you will always have more respect for it if you've been involved in that process. Even if you just do it once, find a farm who does classes, find an outdoorsy uncle who will take you along in the experience, and push yourself. That's my challenge to you this upcoming year. If you're thinking about what am I going to do different in the new year, what am I going to try that's different, if you've never, every step of the way, taken an animal, a breathing, living animal, and turned it into table fare, do that. Do that one time this upcoming year. Tell us, come up with some hashtag for that. Tell us below and we'll make a video out of this. Maybe actually, if you film part of your process, we'll make a video out of that. We'll share you on the channel. But do it. Do every step of the way. See what that's like, and I guarantee you will have more respect for the whole process. And if you're petrified by that idea, if you think that sounds horrible, you could never, maybe look into becoming a vegan. Because otherwise, I personally think if you think it sounds horrible and you could never do it, but you're making all kinds of other people do it, maybe you got to push yourself a little bit more or maybe you got to become a vegan. And I very rarely suggest people become a vegan. So, last question of our Q&A today. Stephanie, any ideas how to convince my husband to let me homeschool our kids? Our oldest is supposed to start kindergarten next fall, but the thought of sending him to school makes me sick. I won out on homeschooling his preschool instead of sending him to one, but my husband still insists that our kids will be socially awkward if we don't send them to school, no matter how many discussions we have about this. This is one area we can't seem to come to an agreement on. Really good question, Stephanie, and there's a lot here, so we're going to break this up a little bit. First, let me give you a little bit of encouraging experience here. This was Kay and me probably 7 years ago, 6 years ago, when we started thinking about school. She wanted to homeschool first. And I, like your husband, thought that would make our kids socially awkward, weird, or lazy. A lot of things that I had seen growing up from the very few experiences I had interacting with homeschooled kids. Homeschooling has gone from a strange thing a few people do for like religious reasons or for behavioral reasons. They have like a really bad kid and like to something a large amount of the population of parents are deciding to do for educational reasons, for safety reasons, because they're concerned about their child's best interests. It's no longer like, oh, you know what? We don't want our child being taught all that science stuff. We're going to keep him home and teach him, science is fake. Now, I mean, it's things that very mainstream people are now looking to homeschool as a solution to answer to multiple problems. So it's become more popular. Now, I came into it with the thought of like, I knew like 3 people. One did it. They were just kind of a weird, I don't know, they were just kind of off and they did it. I had friends who did it for just family reasons. I had friends who did it. The one, he was having real hard reading and learning problems. So I knew a couple families, but I had not yet seen homeschooler families who chose it for educational purposes and who produced like amazing children, really competent children. I just hadn't experienced that yet. And your husband's probably in the same boat. He's probably just not seen what homeschool can do for a child. So how did Kay change my mind? Well, we talked about it a lot. And this is a hard one because eventually a decision will be made, and your family, the way you handle decisions might be different than the way my family does. When me and Kay disagree on something, ultimately a decision needs to be made. How you guys handle that's going to be different. So I'm not going to tell you how your marriage works or how, who gets to make the final call there. Someone will have to make a call, and if you can't agree on it, you have to at least be able, as a married couple, to support even a decision that you don't agree with. Sometimes it's the husband who makes that decision. Sometimes it's the wife. We've all had this experience, but if your marriage is going to work, eventually every marriage has to support a decision the other party would not have made for a marriage to work. So don't let this divide you as a family, even though it's a big one. Just go into it knowing, like, at the end, if you decide, well, we'll go with my husband's decision on this, but I'm going to hate it every step of the way, you have to be able to support the decision even if you don't agree with it for something like this, for the sake of keeping your family together. So that's like my little marriage disclosure there. Now, going forward, how can you convince your husband? How did Kay convince me homeschooling was better? Knowledge is power. Education is power. I find for me personally, if you want to convince me of something, the wrong way to do that is to try to argue with me. I love arguing. There's a reason Accountant Mike was my co-host on the Homesteady show. It's because I love to argue with him. He's my buddy and he sees the world so different than me. And the minute he's like, I think farming is stupid. And I'm like, oh yeah, I think it's the best. Boom, let's go, man. I love that. I get energized by that interchange of ideas and disagreement and trying to outwit your... So if your husband's anything like me, full frontal, like, honey, you're wrong and I'll prove it, is not going to work, because the minute you go into argument mode, up come the walls. So instead, and this is what Kay did with me, and it really helped, she educated me through things she read. She'd say, boy, I read a really interesting thing. You should just read it. Here, I'll send you the link. And then I didn't read it because, just life, I'd forget or whatever. And she'd be like, did you read that thing I sent you? I'd be like, oh, no, I forgot. I'm sorry. She's like, I'd like you to read it because that's why I sent it to you. And then, oh, man, if I'm going to be a good husband, I better be interested in the thing my wife sent me. So just out of wanting to be a good husband, I read it. And I read it, and wow, that's pretty interesting. What was she sharing with me? Not homeschooler vlog, blogs, ranting about how homeschool's so much better. She sent me probably the biggest, like the most powerful thing she ever sent me to read was a book that was a compilation of speeches given about the problems in the public school, delivered by the winner of like the Teacher of the Year award for all of New York State. So let me tell you about this a little bit. The man's name is John Gatto, John Taylor Gatto. Wikipedia info on him: an American author and school teacher who taught in the classroom for nearly 30 years. He devoted much of his energy to his teaching career. Following his resignation, he authored several books on modern education, criticizing its ideology, history, and consequences. He was named New York City Teacher of the Year in 1989, 1990, 1991, and New York State Teacher of the Year in 1991. New York City Teacher of the Year in 1989, 90, 91, and New York State Teacher of the Year in 91. So he won in the city 3 years, and for the whole state 1 year. And his speech to accept the Teacher of the Year award was about how bad the public school system has become and how bad it is for children. When I read this was through the eyes of a man who dedicated his life, 30 years of his career, to the system. He is an educator. He wanted to teach kids and help kids, and all that he got out of 30 years of that endeavor is how broken the system is and how many problems there are with it. If after 30 years of homesteading and running this channel, I, at the end of it, sat down here for a Farm Friday, I sat down and I said, listen, this is awful. This is an awful way to spend your life. This is totally not going to help you become more self-sufficient. You're not going to be able to feed your family doing this. You're not going to get a better life from this. You're going to be a slave to this. This is not going to do what you want it to do. I've spent 30 years doing this, but trust me, it's not going to do that for you. And then like the next week I didn't put out a video saying like, oh, just kidding, I was having a bad day. The next week I put out another one, and then I wrote a book about how like, don't homestead. Trust me, 30 years of my life spent doing this, it's not gonna do it. Well, then you might say, wow, this guy did it for 30 years. Why did he come to these conclusions? Read my book and then be like, wow, that's interesting. That's exactly what happened when I read his book, Dumbing Us Down. I'll have a link below for Dumbing Us Down, the hidden curriculum of compulsory schooling. It totally changed my view on the ability of public school to train our children and socialize our children. This is an argument that comes up against homeschooling so much. You will not properly socialize your kids. Your kids will not be well socialized. They will be weirdos who are like not able to interact with society and grow up and just be strange, weird people who get marginalized. And I have seen nothing could be further from the truth. Anything in life, there are outliers, people you could point to who say like, oh, that doesn't work, look at that guy. But on the bigger picture, what I see coming out of homeschool today is confident, driven, well-rounded, well-socialized children who are ready to take on a world which requires creativity, drive, and most of all, confidence. The business I've built here on YouTube, with my videos, our podcast. I am feeding my family, doing something I love to do, and sharing it with you. You know what happens? Every day I make these videos, just opening up our life to the internet. You know what happens every day? I get just like hater comments below. There are people who regularly watch our videos just to leave a negative comment. And I leave them there because, hey, that's okay. Like, unless they're really rude and they're swearing at people or whatever, I leave them because that's the world. The world is full of negative people who want to shoot you down. The world is full of people who want to see you fail. The world is full of jealous people who want you to do worse than them because they're unhappy with what they've done. And every day I put out a video, and every day I get these comments that I read and they hurt my feelings. They make me, oh man, that person thinks I'm a loser. Oh man, that person thinks I'm just a what's the word I get all, hipster farmer who doesn't do any work and just makes his wife do everything while he vlogs. Oh man, this person thinks I'm just a bad individual altogether. It hurts my feelings, but I'm very confident. That's the only way I've been able to build this business. And as a direct result, live this wonderful life with my family, doing what we as a family want to do together. And the world is changing. We don't need factory workers. The public school system was designed to produce factory workers. 200 years ago, a lot of people needed to shut up, get in line, stay put, do one thing they were told to do, don't ask questions, don't challenge the system, do your work because we need to make automobiles. And you'll get paid your thing and go home and come back tomorrow and no, you can't have a day off. You got to make automobiles. The world's different now. Robots can do that, and they're going to be doing it more and more and more. You're going to see not only what the robots are already doing, you're going to see waiters and waitresses' jobs disappear. You're going to see everybody who works at the gas station is going to disappear. The grocery store doesn't need employees. Robots can stack shelves. Robots can check you out. Robots can do security. Like, more and more, robots are going to get better at taking jobs, factory worker, get in line, shut your mouth, don't ask question jobs. Public school, my son, he had a when he was very little, he still does have a bit, but he had a bit of a speech impediment, the way he said certain words. And we recognized an area where we needed to bring it outside out. We have never taught a kid how to deal with a speech impediment, so we're not saying like we're going to teach our kid everything because we're homeschoolers, we don't need anybody else. So we looked into ways of people who could help our son with this issue, and we found out there was a voice coach, and we booked with her once a week, this voice coach, and she happened to work at the local school. So we would go and bring my son to the voice coach for an hour. And while he was in with this private one-on-one teacher, helping him get through his speech impediment, I was sitting in the hallway of a public school watching kindergartners, first graders, second graders. How much time was spent getting these kids to get in a straight line, getting these kids to quiet down, getting these kids to put their hands at their sides, getting these kids to walk in single file. Up, Johnny, back in the line, close your mouth. No, Johnny, back in the line, close your mouth. 20 kids sitting there were like, Johnny, would you just get back in the line? Finally, Johnny gets back in the line, and then we march into the lunchroom where we sit at the table. Quiet down. This is lunch. Quiet down. And I understand why. I totally get it. If you're a teacher right now and you're mad at me because you're like, oh, Ost, you're such a jerk. Teachers just have to control all these kids. What are they supposed to do? Like chaos? Yeah, that's the problem. Like, the teachers need to keep the kids in a line, because if they just let 20 kids in a building go crazy, it would be crazy. And that public school, the whole idea of cramming all those kids all together at the same age with just one adult, I think that's crazy. And I went through it. I survived public school. I did it all my life. Not all my, I did it my entire, 20 years growing up. I did that. I did a couple days of preschool and then kindergarten, the whole public school thing, and I turned out okay. And I'm pretty happy with where my life has gone, but I don't chalk much of where I've got to learning to stand in a line quietly, listen, don't ask questions. If anything, I thank the teachers who let me push. I had teachers, and that's why I'm not blaming teachers. There are good teachers in the public schools. I can name off the top of my hand probably 5. And you know what? I will name them because they helped me get where I am. Miss Lassard, 3rd grade. I wanted to be an astronaut, and she like fanned those flames of astronautdom. So I never made it, Miss Lassard. I'm sorry, but I'm happy with where I got, so thank you. Miss Priestley, 4th grade. Miss Priestley was same kind of, at the time I was really into flying planes. I had gone from like the moon to like, well, just the atmosphere. And Miss Priestley like super helped me, you know, be excited about being a pilot and like flying plane thing. By 6th grade, Miss Payne. Miss Payne let me put on a weekly, this is ridiculous, I put on a weekly show called The Ost Leno Show. It was like a comedy variety show. We would make fun of situations happening in the school. We'd do interviews with fake celebrities. Every week, Miss Payne let us put this show on for her class and the entire, what they called a cluster. 3 classes every week. Why she let us do that, I have no idea. Maybe she's one of those good teachers who saw this kid's got potential in entertaining people and putting on a show. And if I let him do it now in 6th grade, maybe someday, crazy thought, he'll actually make a living entertaining people and putting on a show. Thank you, Miss Payne. Next on the docket would be Mr. Burgeon, who you guys know much better as Uncle Bourbon. He not only was one of my best teachers, but he's become one of my best friends in life. In high school, he was a shop teacher. He taught me a lot about kind of bucking the system, working outside the box. You know what happened to him? He was a teacher who got kids who didn't care. The rejects who applied for shop class because they didn't have to do anything, he got them to do things. He got shop kids to build stuff and get involved and get excited about projects. And you know what happened to him? He got fired because he wouldn't submit to the standardized testing that they wanted. He wouldn't submit to the protocol they wanted from teachers. He was becoming friends with his students, and that wasn't okay. He was having fun with his students, and that wasn't okay. He was having too much fun. Students shouldn't be having this much fun. This is school. They're supposed to be learning, not having fun. He got fired because of that. One of my best friends. So 4. There you go, 4 teachers out of all those teachers that actually I can thank. You might be one of those teachers. If you're doing that and you're in the public school, keep doing it because it works. You can help kids get that confidence and get there. But here's the problem with public school. You're playing the odds. If your kid's in public school, it can work. You just better hope they get a Miss Payne or a Miss Lassard or a Mr. Burgeon or Miss Priestley, because if they don't, they can wind up feeling like they can't do it. They can face this real world today. They can get out of high school, look at it and say, oh man, I won't be able to get a job unless I go to college. And so they'll go into debt, go to college, get in debt, but not for something that they could actually get a job in. They'll just get like a general degree and have $60,000 worth of debt and come out of college and still not have a job and think, okay, well maybe I gotta do this. I gotta do this. And like their whole life, they won't be confident enough to do what they actually want to do, what they'd actually be really good at, and they'll just get stuck in line, quiet, asking permission to go to the bathroom. I'm like, no, that's not what I want for my kids. I want my kids to be confident, to feel like they can do anything, to feel like they can take on whatever is thrown at them because they're smart, and maybe they're not good at this one thing, so they don't have to spend a lot of time doing it. They can focus on what they're really good at, what they can become a master at. And if that changes because they are no longer interested in becoming an astronaut, well, that's okay. They can follow their passions, learn through those passions, and that's what homeschool allows people to do. And I've gotten off on so far from your original question, Stephanie, which is, how do you convince your husband that homeschool is better? And I think the way to do it, the best way you can do it, don't argue. To whatever your ability is, give him things to read. Find things to read from people like John Gatto who have more experience than you, more clout in your husband's eyes, right? Your husband looks at you and thinks, oh, my wife thinks this is a good idea, but she's crazy. Maybe he doesn't think you're crazy, but the point is, if you say, no, this guy won teacher, oh wow, I'm reading this interesting article. This guy won Teacher of the Year award 3 years in a row. Wow, you should read this. It's It's about education. Did you read that article I sent you? I'd really like you to read that article, honey. If you love me, you're going to read that article. Get them to read that article. And realize, you know what? Kids can become very well socialized. I feel they can become better socialized by homeschool. Are there examples of poorly socialized homeschoolers? Oh yeah. But if you care enough to do this with your kid, you're going to care enough to properly get them involved in social activities, other homeschool groups. If you have a religious affiliation, get them involved with education through that. If you have a background in some kind of science or some kind of, just any kind of interest that people congregate. There's STEM groups out there. You can get involved in STEM classes, learning about science and technology together. Maybe you're an artist. Find some local artist places to take classes with other people. Get them socialized. Not just with a bunch of kids their age, with adults. Teach your young kids to talk to an adult. When was the last time you had a conversation with a middle school child and you felt like, wow, that was a really nice conversation? I can tell you the last time that happened with me, it was with a kid who's homeschooled and very involved socially in other things with people younger than them and older than them. I'm going to close this up with a couple bullet points just so I don't get too much hate in the comments below. But again, I can take the hate because fortunately, thanks to those 4 teachers, my parents, all that, I am a confident person. Bullet point number 1, if you are sending your kid to public school, you're not a bad parent. There are people who have to do that. There are people who choose to do that. I'm not saying you're a bad parent. And I went to public school. My moms and dads sent me there. They love me very much. They're great parents. Just make sure you're involved. You are involved in making sure they're properly socialized, because that's not the teacher's job at public school. Their job is not to socialize your kid. Their job is not to give your kid confidence. They don't get paid based off how confident and well socialized your kids become at the end of the year. Some of the teachers take on that extra work and they do a great job. And I named my 4. But other teachers don't, and that's not their job. So you have to still be involved if your kid goes to public school. If you're a teacher, my bullet point to you is you're not the problem unless you're a bad teacher. I had 4 amazing teachers. I had a truck full of moderate, okay teachers, and I had a couple ones who I will not name out of the kindness of my heart who were bad teachers. They made me feel bad. They made me feel dumb. They made me feel unqualified. I look back at them with anger. Not a lot of anger. I've had a really nice life. I'm not overly angry. But like when I think about the way they were as teachers, I think, boy, what were they thinking? They should have become like a waiter or worked at Walmart or something. Like, nothing against Walmart worker, just like it would have been better for them not to interact with a bunch of kids. That's what I'm saying, because they were just not right for the job. So if you're a teacher, I'm not saying you're bad, I'm just saying be a good teacher. And bullet point number 3, homeschool is not a perfect solution to everything. If you choose to homeschool your kids, you still do need to properly socialize them. Make sure that they learn how to speak to adults, older kids, younger kids, the whole lot. And do that by getting them involved with adults, older kids, younger kids, the whole lot. Take control of your child's education. And the final bullet point is, no matter what you decide, homeschool, public school, you as a parent are the sole number 1 responsible person for making sure your child is properly educated, properly socialized, comes out confident and ready to take on the world. You can't blame teachers for that. You can't blame the system. You need to do whatever you have to do, because nothing is more important in this world than your children and your marriage mate, and that's it. So with that, I'm going to close this one down. And if you want to get a question answered on Ask Homesteady, it's really easy. Just hashtag your questions from the previous week, Ask Homesteady, and like we're now doing, we're not answering all the questions, because as you can tell today, I want to answer them a little bit more, make sure I cover all the bases, and I don't want this to be a 3-hour production. So hashtag Ask Homesteady, and if I pick it, it will show up as one of the questions next week. And if you like what we do, if you like the fact that we answer your questions with this amount of thought and take this kind of time to help you in whatever way we do, inspire you, help you figure stuff out, whatever it is, consider becoming a Homesteady Pioneer. It's $5 a month. It's the only way we can do this show. We do not earn enough from YouTube to feed my kids and take care of our bills. We do that thanks to our Homesteady Pioneer supporters. $5 a month, you can click the link below to become one. We are so grateful to all you. Or if you can't do that, we understand. If you shop at Amazon, type at www.amsteady.com. It will forward you to Amazon. Your purchases will give us a little bit of a bonus for sending you there, which helps us to do this show as well. And finally, something everybody can do, just share the show. Pick your favorite video of the week every week. Share one video a week with a new group of people every week. And that would really help us grow, which that's important too. All right, I'm going horse. It's a good time to stop. We will see you next week. And if you think I should shave my mustache, well, comment below. We'll see Monday if I kept it or not.